Hi, everyone. My name is Carolyn Kane. I'm Assistant Director of Alumni Relations, and I'd like to welcome you all to the DePaul Alumni webinar, Creative Writing, the Basics of Storytelling. I do want to let everyone know that this webinar will be recorded so that it's accessible for other alumni who are unable to attend. I would also like to ask everyone to please update your display name to your full first and last name. Without further ado, I would like to introduce to you, give a brief introduction of Dr. Michele Morano, who is a professor and chair of the DePaul English Department. She is the author of 2 books, the travel memoir, Grammar Lessons, Translating a Life in Spain, and the forthcoming memoir, Like Love. She teaches undergraduate and graduate creative writing workshops and is a founding editor of DePaul's social justice publishing house, Big Shoulders Books. And without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Michele.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today. It's such a different way of spending the middle of a Wednesday than what I've been doing lately. So I really appreciate that you all are interested in this topic and have popped in to get a little bit of an overview of creative writing. I feel like in this time of this pandemic crisis, a lot of people are leaning into creativity as a way of processing or escaping or dealing with this time. And some of us have just a tiny bit more time on our hands if we're not commuting or whatnot. So I think it's a great topic, and I was really excited to be asked to present on this. I opted to give a really broad overview in 1 hour of the basics of creative writing because I thought it might be good to help you all feel when you finish this session that you understand how to start creating a story. So that's the aim right now. During this crisis, a lot of people feel that they want to escape from reality and create fiction. And others feel that they really want to embrace what we're going through and kind of document it. And so a lot of people are also writing creative nonfiction. This presentation is going to focus primarily on fiction, but really everything we're talking about here is also applicable in terms of skills to creative nonfiction as well. So I hope that this will enable you to work in whatever genre interests you most. I am just going to run through a presentation to kind of give you some visuals to go along with this. So in 1 short hour, I'm going to talk about, on the one hand, the elements of effective storytelling, and on the other hand, the writing process. These are the 2 focuses that I always use in my creative writing workshops at DePaul and elsewhere. And so we're just going to skim the surface of these. But like I said, hopefully it will enable you to get a sense of how you might start writing and inspire you a little bit. I should say, first of all, that I've built in a couple of writing exercises. So it would be great if you had a paper and pen in front of you. If you want to quickly grab something to write with, that would be terrific. It's also possible if you can arrange if you can split your screen or toggle back and forth to a word processing program, you can just do some writing right on the computer, whatever is most comfortable for you. So the elements of effective storytelling that we're going to touch on are scene, character, tension, and narrative structure. And then the elements of process are generating material, drafting, and revision. One of the reasons why I always talk about process in my courses is because perhaps many of you have had the experience of wanting to write, starting to write, and then something happens, you get kind of bogged down, and you don't follow through on it. There's a lot of procrastination that gets connected to creative writing and a lot of guilt, which is curious, right? Even I struggle with this as a writer who's writing all the time. I'm always feeling like, oh, I should be writing, or I should be doing more. I haven't done enough. And especially when what I'm writing is giving me a little trouble, or I'm having some difficulty getting a purchase in a piece that I'm writing, it's useful to have strategies to fall back on. So that's why I'm combining both of those. All right, so we're going to start talking about scene. A scene is really the building block of any story. And the definition of a scene is whatever is happening in a specific place during a specific time, right? And we can think a little bit about film when we think of scenes. If you were going to film, for example, a scene that took place in a dining room, you would arrange the lighting, you would set up the camera, you would create that scene. Now, let's say there was a dinner party and two people got into a scuffle and it tumbled out onto the front lawn. In order to film the next scene on the front lawn, you would have to bring the cameras out there, set up the lighting and all of that. And so it would be a different scene. When we're writing, we tend to think of everything as kind of fluid, but it is important to remember that for readers, we don't have anything in our minds. You might have memory or imagination filling in all the details of what's happening and where it's happening, but readers don't have any of that. So you have to remember to give it to us with each scene. Okay, so whatever's happening in a specific place during a specific time. So have I mentioned specificity? That's really so important. I can't stress it enough. And when we're thinking about scene, we might be thinking about sensory details, not only what we see, but what we hear, the texture of air on our skin, what we might smell or taste, if those factor in. We might also be thinking about the time of day. A scene will look very different at 4 p.m., even if it's an indoor scene, at 4 p.m. in December versus at 4 p.m. in June, even if the windows are closed. Everything is still going to be different based on the time of day, and I got ahead of myself there, and the time of year. So when we're thinking about scene, we're thinking about all these specific elements of the kind of the background of what's happening. So I'm going to give you an example of an opening scene. And this is actually a nonfiction story. So it's kind of an essay, but it reads very much like a piece of fiction by Joanne Beard from her wonderful book, The Boys of My Youth. This piece is called Out There, and I'm going to read, this is the very beginning of it. It isn't even 8 a.m. and I'm hot. My rear end is welded to the seat just like it was yesterday. I'm 50 miles from the motel and about 1,500 from home in a little white Mazda with 140,000 miles on it and no rust. I'm all alone in Alabama with only a cooler and a tape deck for company. It's already in the high 80s. Yesterday, coming up from the Keys through Florida, I had a day-long anxiety attack that I decided last night was really heat prostration. I was a cinder with a brain. I was actually whimpering. I kept thinking I saw alligators at the edge of the highway. So you can see that this is a pretty engaging opening scene. We know exactly where the writer is. The narrator, that she's in this particular car. We know some things about the car that help us to understand something about her background and her life. We know where she's coming from, and we know what her state of mind is. So there's actually a real lot of detail in this, and I think it's a pretty good opening scene. So what I would like to do now is to help you write a scene. So I'd like you to think about a place that has been important to you in your life. It could be a current place, it could be the room you're in or a room you'd like to be in. It could be something from the past, but it has to be specific. So don't write about Chicago, that's too broad, or even Millennium Park, which is still too broad. Instead, think about that grassy area right in front of the Gary band shell, right? Imagine that it's a Friday evening in the summer and that there's a concert about to begin. That's the kind of specificity I'm looking for. So close your eyes for just a moment. Think about the place that you're in, that you're remembering. Imagine what time of day it is and what time of year. Think about what you see there, what you hear, what you smell, what you feel on your skin. Okay? And now I would like you to write about this place using, as Joanne Beard did, the first person, I, and the present tense. Using the present tense is a really useful tool because it tends to help your mind give you details that you might not have remembered initially, but it just makes everything much more immediate. But I want to do this using something we call free writing. Some of you may be familiar with this already, but free writing is a really wonderful writer's tool. Its primary goal is to get us around the inner critic that most of us carry around with us daily. That voice inside that as soon as you go to write something says, oh, that sounds stupid. Oh, don't do that. And just get past that and let things out so then you know what you're working with. Okay, so the rules in free writing are to write as quickly as possible, and don't worry about errors, don't worry about capitalization, punctuation, any of that. Just write as quickly as possible and don't stop. Okay, it feels a little weird if it's the first time you're doing it, but you just have to start writing and keep going until I tell you to stop. When you're doing this on your own, it's a good idea to set a timer. And if your mind goes blank in the middle of this, that's okay. You just write, my mind is blank, and it won't stay blank very long because the mind wants to be occupied. It doesn't want to be sitting vacant. Okay, and so the idea is to do this in just 3 minutes. So describe a specific place at a specific time of day in a specific season. Write in the first person, present tense. I am sitting here, blah, 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 even if you're writing from memory. And don't stop. I will tell you when to stop. Okay, ready? Go. Don't stop, keep writing. And stop. I imagine that some of you are continuing to write a little bit more. Some of you are going like this. You may feel exhilarated by that. You may feel a little frustrated or feel like it's a weird thing to do. Maybe you feel liberated. But the thing about free writing is that it's really great for generating material. And it's also really great for whenever you get to a point where you're not sure what to do next in a piece of writing. Very often I write mostly directly onto the computer, and I will be working away, and just kind of struggling. And if I just leave my desk, grab a pad of paper, and just sit down in a different location and do a free writing, sometimes for 5 or 10 minutes, I almost always solve whatever problem. Not that it's easy to then work it into what I was writing, but I almost always find some shift in perspective that helps me understand what I'm trying to do. Side note, I find free writing just useful for everything. Whenever I have some kind of uncertainty or turmoil inside me and I don't really know what I think about it, or I'm feeling very unsettled, I will just sit down and write away. And it's amazing how often that helps develop a little bit of perspective. Okay, so you played around a little bit with scene there. One other thing that something else free writing does that's very useful for writers is that you're writing really quickly or you're typing really quickly, and no matter how fast you can write or type, it's really no match for the speed of the human brain. So you have all these thoughts flying by, and in free writing, you're just grabbing them and putting them down on the page. It can often feel frustrating when you're writing that you can't keep up with your thought process. But free writing reminds you that there's a whole stream of stuff going on in there all the time. And sometimes it's enough just to grab what's right there. Sometimes it's okay if we're not really keeping up with ourselves. We can just, rest in the assurance that there's going to be more. Our imagination and our mind is always going to give us more of what we need for the writing. Okay. So now that you have the beginning of a scene, because you have a place where something can happen in, now we need something to happen, right? That's the crux of a story. Something has to happen. So how do we make something happen? You get a character involved, because people are very good at making things happen. So character, there are many, many, many different ways of approaching character. One of my favorites comes from something that the writer Kevin Moffat, who's a really wonderful short story writer, said at DePaul when he was giving a reading here quite a while ago, maybe 10 years ago. He said that short story writing is all about figuring out what your characters want. And that your job as a writer is to figure out what your main character wants more than anything else in the world, and then prevent that person from getting it for the length of a story or a novel. That's a really simplistic, but I think very interesting way of thinking about character. We have a tendency in fiction to want to create characters that are thinly veiled versions of ourselves and then give them better lives than we have. So we have often a tendency to want to protect our characters, to not let bad things happen to them. We become very maternal, paternal toward them. That's, lovely and noble, but it's just death in a piece of creative writing. You want things to happen. Now, side note, if you happen to be writing in nonfiction, things have already happened, right? And so it's a different set of issues and questions that you would be asking. But in fiction, I often see with new writers a tendency, to make sure the characters don't have to struggle too much. And B, sometimes, and I say new writers because it doesn't have to do with age, it has to do with how much practice a person has. Sometimes new writers also really want to isolate their characters. They want to make sure there's only one character. The character isn't moving around a lot in the world. All of the tension and the friction is internal, and it's because they're worried about managing, I think, all of the elements of a real live person moving about in the world. But again, that doesn't make for very good fiction. So my refrain always, always, always with students is gotta have these characters, you know, get them into trouble, find out what they want, keep them from getting it, find out. Characters can really only act and react, act and react. So in relation to their desire, are they acting on something or are they reacting to something? That's another good way of thinking about it. So when you create a character, it's a good idea to create somebody who is different from you in at least one major way, or wholly different from you, you know, based on people you know, a little bit here, a little bit there. And that way you can really listen to that character. I know that sounds a little new agey, but I think once you do start to create a character, it's a really good idea to get to know them. And it's amazing what your imagination will offer to you in that process. Again, free writing is a really useful tool for this, because sometimes I'll be writing a short story in the third person, for example, and I'm writing about specific characters. And then I'll just sit down and do a free writing in the first person, in the voice of one character, and just let that character tell me, like, what's your life like, and answer questions. And it really is a cool process, and it's I think it's really fun. So to help you develop character right now, I'm actually going to think a little bit about tension and where tension comes from. We always need to have tension in a story from the very beginning. If we think again to that sample that I gave you from Joanne Beard, the tension in that story comes from the fact that she's uncomfortable. She's having this heat prostration / anxiety. She seems to be running away from something, running towards something. She's in a state of limbo. And so there's immediate tension that's going on. To help you develop a little tension, I'm going to ask you to put two characters together into the setting that you just devised. And the situation will be that one character wants something from the other character that the second character does not want to give. Okay? That's the basis of a story right there. One person wants something from someone else and that person doesn't want to give it. So if we go back to my example of, you know, the setting of the lawn in front of the bandshell in Millennium Park, I would say, okay, let's say I have a man and a woman, a couple. Let's say they've been together for a while. Things are progressing. Let's say they're sitting there having a lovely time, eating a little supper before the concert begins. And let's say there are kids running around and the man casually says, oh, I can't wait to have children. I'm really getting excited about this. I'm thinking we should move forward pretty soon. And the woman is not ready to entertain that idea. That's just a story already right there. Okay. But it could be any two people. It could be a parent and a child. It could be two friends. It could be two strangers, whatever. I want you to think of two characters, give them each names right now, the first things that come to your mind. Put them in your place in a situation where one wants something that the other doesn't want to give. Okay. And again, we're going to do a free writing and it's just going to be for 3 minutes. So you can write in the first person if you want to, you can write in the third person if you want to, however you want to do it. But when I say go, I want you to start writing and, feel free to write. My mind is blank. My mind is blank. I don't know what I'm doing, but then just keep at it for 3 minutes. Okay. Ready? Go. And stop. Again, shake out the hand if you're writing with a pen. Do this if you're writing on the computer. Let yourself relax a little after that burst of creativity. I hope that felt less strange to do on the second time around. And I hope that something interesting was happening on the page for you. If not, that's no problem. 3 minutes isn't any time at all to really get going, but this is just to give you a taste of what you might do on your own. What you have is the basis of a story because you have tension arising from an unmet desire. And you can write an entire story in one scene. There are many, many examples of great short stories that have been written with a really tight focus on one scene. Now, it's possible that the author is stepping back for flashbacks, but that the story begins and ends in this one particular place at this particular time in a situation that's going to need to somehow be resolved, or sometimes resolution means an intensification, right? So sometimes the resolution is that things just got even worse or even more tense and they're not going to get better, and the reader knows that. Sometimes the resolution is that the tension kind of dissipates. So it's interesting to think about how you can write an entire story out of just one scene. But it's also possible to write a story that has many scenes, and that in between those scenes, there might be summary that moves us forward to the next scene. And then a little kind of sitting in a scene. Some scenes might be very short. Some might be longer and go on for pages. There might be a shift in time. It's often the case that we begin stories in the middle of things, in medias res, we call it. So the story doesn't have to go from beginning to end. Let me just use, I'm making this up off the top of my head as I sit here, but let me use the example of this couple that I've put in front of the band shell. The man wants to have children, the woman's not sure. I could start the story at the moment when they arrive, spread out their blanket, get out their snacks. I could start the story at the moment when he brings up this topic, watch her response, and then flash back to their arrival. I could start the story really close to the end, when they're already experiencing maximum tension and it's unclear what's going to happen, and then go back and narrate all the way through that. All of that is possible still just using one scene. So you can imagine that if you add several scenes together, 4, 5, you can place them in different order. So you could tell it linearly, one scene happens, the next day this happens, 3 weeks later happens, 2 months later happens, or you can shift those all around. So there's really kind of endless ways of dealing with chronology in stories. But the main thing for you to know is that you have those options. They're all open to you. I tend to like to write stories in a linear way the first time through, and then just so I have in my head an understanding of how things are going to go, and then I will move things around in a later draft, try to start a little later, find a moment of really nice tension to begin with, and then elaborate on that tension as we move forward. Okay, so how do we get, though, from this scene you just sketched out to the development of a full-blown short story? Well, the main advice I have is that you just keep writing and you create something that the wonderful author Anne Lamott, I can't recommend this book highly enough, Bird by Bird. Some of you surely have read it. It came out 25 years ago, which is hard to believe. Because whenever I share it with students now, they're just sort of bowled over and can't believe the wonderful advice in it. It's very practical. It works really well for fiction and for nonfiction. And it's also it's a book that really demystifies the writing process and lays bare the fact that it can be pretty ugly for a lot of us. People are not sitting down like just composing beautiful pristine prose. That's not how Toni Morrison wrote her amazing novels. As she said, I revise and revise and revise, so it looks like I never did, right? But the early drafts are pretty messy. And so Anne Lamott has a lot of really great advice. I'm going to share 2 bits of her advice with you today. The first is that you have to create a shitty first draft. That has become a technical term in my courses. I usually abbreviate it SFD. You have to write a shitty first draft. Everybody does it. Now, if you're, a few years ago, I moved here in Chicago, and I found in my basement storage unit a box of stories from college. So I sat down on the floor immediately and kind of went through them and was amazed at how many truly spectacular stories I found that only went on for 2 or 3 pages and then just kind of petered out. Like, I kept documents after documents. I kept saying, this is a great story. I didn't remember writing it, so I wanted to know what was going to happen. And then nothing, and then it just ended because I kind of got myself into a situation that I didn't know how to get out of. And I think that's really common. So what I tell my students when they're drafting is that your draft can be as drafty as it needs to be, but it's got to be complete. You got to get to the end. On that first draft, you have to push through so that you know what you're getting your arms around for revision. So you know what you have to work with. Otherwise, it's too easy to stop when things get difficult. I think it's really good, if possible, to bang out a short story in one sitting. That's really hard to do. But even if you have to leave some holes in the middle and just keep going and then find another scene and kind of work your way to the ending of whatever tension you've created, it's really, really helpful to get to the end. Side note, a really great piece of advice that was given to my colleague, Rebecca Johns Trissler, who teaches in the English department, got this advice from Elizabeth McCracken, who is the director of the Iowa Writers Workshop. And Elizabeth said that if you're writing a novel, you have to write it, the whole thing, the first time through, in under 6 months. Not everybody does that, of course, but she said if you take longer than 6 months to draft the whole thing, you are a different person by the time you're finishing it than you were when you started it. And then you have to navigate all of that distance as you're creating, subsequent drafts and improving it. And I think that's a really great bit of advice. As somebody who has never written a book in anything like 6 months, I fully believe that advice, and I'm going to keep trying to implement it. But I do think that for say a short story, a more reasonable, 3 days would be great. If you could just get right through to the end. When I've been able to do that is when I've had the best outcomes with fiction. Okay, so we create a shitty first draft, and then we also have to figure out how to structure a short story. And Anne Lamott, again, gives us a really good bit of advice. There's a formula that is so simple, but if you just literally go to your bookshelves and start pulling off any novels, any memoirs, any short stories, essays that are narrative, I think you'll find a lot of them utilize this structure, the ABDCE structure. Begins with action, then it gives us some background, then there's development, climax, ending. It's a super simple way of thinking about structure. The even simpler way is to think beginning, middle, and end, right? Which is helpful, but doesn't really tell us how do we get it off the ground? How do we create a beginning? So if you have action, that puts us in right away, and then you can step back. So again, let's look at Joanne Beard's Out There, this opening. It isn't even 8 a.m. and I'm hot. My rear end is welded to the seat just like it was yesterday. I'm 50 miles from the motel. Okay, so we've got this action that she's driving and that she's cranky. And we know this right up front, and there's a strong voice. And so we start to see her character, the narrator's character, developing. But she puts us right there in the moment. It doesn't have to be present tense that allows you to do that. Right after this, there's another short paragraph about the drive yesterday, and then she goes into the background, the story of why she's on this road trip. And it is because her husband has asked her for a divorce. And so she's taken herself down to Florida and is now on her way back home to Iowa. It ends up being a really kind of beautiful and harrowing essay because she gets harassed by another driver on the road. I'm not giving anything away about this essay to tell you that. It's really wonderful, and I recommend that you read it. But it's just nice to see how, she uses this formula to pull readers in and then to pause and give us a little background. So for the final writing exercise, what I'd like to do right now is just have you, again, another just quick 3 minutes. I want you to just think again about this character. Ignore for a moment the scene. So think about the main character. You have to pick one of the two that you've developed. Ignore for a moment the scene and just let yourself write the background. What is this character's story? What's this person's deal? What have they gone through in their lives? Who are they? Just start right now, and then for 3 minutes, just get a sense of who is this character. Okay, ready and go. And stop. This is where I really wish we were face to face, because I'd love to ask people what they discovered about their characters, what they found interesting, what they might want to pursue, all of that kind of good stuff. But the beauty of this format is that we have quite a lot of people here today, and none of us had to commute. And I'm happy to see, I scrolled through really quickly to see the list of names, and it doesn't look like we lost any or many. So I'm happy that the free writing exercises didn't make people run screaming. So So yeah, so now you have really, really, really the basis of a story. If you wanted to keep working on this today, this afternoon, you could flesh this out, I'm sure, into a story. But you could also use some of these tools and skills to develop a totally new idea, a new situation, a new set of characters, and new scenes. So then I want finally to land on the part of writing that comprises the bulk of writing, which is revision. This is something that is the hardest part of writing. I wish that weren't true, but it is. But for my money, it's also the most fun part of writing. I always feel a little bit antsy as I'm drafting a story until I get to the end and know, okay, I've kind of got the landscape. I know what I'm working with. And then it gets much more fun. Not that it's not also frustrating, but then you have something to work with. You have your materials, you have the kind of clay that you're going to mold. The tricky thing about revision is that we often, like, you might write a story that you feel like is, oh, that's pretty good. Like, that's really a story. I feel like it's pretty good. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I wrote a story and I was very proud of it. I felt like it really hung together, and I thought there's a character at the center that I'm really interested in and I like what happens. And I gave it to my partner. He's not a writer, but he's a reader. He reads everything. And he also is someone who is so lovely, but has absolutely no poker face. So that's a little bit of a problem. So why he mostly doesn't read my work, but I gave him this story to read and he read it and he was like, yeah, no, it's good. It's good. And I said, okay, it's good. And he goes, yeah, it's good. I mean, it's not great. So we are still together. We worked through that one. But no, I appreciate having his honest feedback. And I knew that was the state of the story when I gave it to him. I knew it was good, but I also knew it wasn't great. And I was hoping that he would tell me it was better than I really knew it was, which of course he wasn't going to do. So, so sometimes we get to that stage and we think, all right, so I have to deepen this somehow. It's very surface level. There needs to be more complexity to it. There needs to be, maybe an idea that's circulating underneath this that I can develop more. And in the process of revising, we often have to make a pretty good piece worse. So we have to take it apart. We have to, and then, so a week or 2 weeks after I had this conversation with him, I started working on my story and I thought, well, I've broken it now. Now I don't even have anything that's pretty good, right? But what was I ever going to do with a pretty good story? I wanted it to be really good, to be great. And so it took a long time of putting it back together and thinking, okay, that's better, but it's not really good, really great yet. So I'm going to take it apart again. And so this is part of the process. This is the part that I often forget to tell my students before they start complaining, to prepare them for this. But then I'm able to say, no. It's not that you're doing anything wrong. It's that you're doing everything right. This is the nature of the creative process. You had things mostly in place and now you've shifted and they're not in place anymore. But when you bring everything back together a little bit deeper with more detail, more sense of character developed, more of a psychological complexity to a relationship, then it gets better and better. And when it's finally done, and also of course when you have an editor who says, no, this is great and we're going to run it, then there's just no better feeling for some of us. And it's why we keep doing this and having dealing with all the frustration, because it is so wonderful when we have the payoff of knowing that we've created something really great and putting it out into the world, and fingers crossed, hearing occasionally from readers that the communication worked, that what they have read mattered to them, which is a really wonderful thing, and ultimately I think what all of this is about. So, okay, I'm going to end there because I see it's 12:47 and I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions. So Harolyn is going to, I think, comb through the comment section. If anybody has questions, I would be very happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for that presentation. And if you have any questions, you can send them through the chat. And we had a few. Let me pull it. Someone wanted to know if the slides will be made available after this today. Would you be able to share the slideshow you had today?
Oh, absolutely. But I think, aren't you going to post it, the whole presentation?
Yes, so this is being recorded, so this will be posted on our blog, and then also I can send the presentation in the post-event survey as well.
Perfect. Yes. No, I'm happy to share it. Yeah.
Okay. Someone said that they took a business technical writing class. Is there a huge difference between the two?
Could not be more different. They could not be more different. No, completely different. A business technical writing course is really about, it's about communication, and clarity is the primary driver of that. With creative writing, clarity is of course important, but there's so much more that's about, in business communication, well, wait a minute. I'm confusing this with technical communication. No, I wouldn't say that. Let me take this back. It's not that there are elements that are similar. Certainly, elements of process can be similar. But I think that in business communication, the writing is more of a vehicle for information that has to be conveyed. And in creative writing, it's more that the writing is a vehicle for an experience that you're trying to give the reader. So you really want, when you're creating a scene, the whole idea is to bring the reader into that place and feel that they are actually living what this character is living. I'm reading the most wonderful novel right now called Valentine. It's been all over the place. It's gotten a lot of attention. And every time I read a chapter of that, I close the book afterwards and look around and think, where am I? Because I've been in West Texas for this last little while, and I really feel like I've been there. So I think creative writing is more about the experience that you're delivering to readers. Yeah.
Any tips for creating a good ending?
Yes. Endings are really hard. That's a great question. Thank you. Endings are really hard. I'm one of those people who, and this always makes others cringe, except for those who are just like me. Before I read any novel, I'm going to read the ending first. I'm going to read those last couple of lines, that last short paragraph. Almost never does that reveal anything about what's going to happen in the book, because the story has ended already. And now it's just about the author. I always say the author landing the plane without crashing. If I'm going to invest my time to read 300, 400 pages of a book, I want to know that the plane's not going to crash at the end, right? I just want to know that technically this is somebody who can manage a lovely ending. And so two of the ways that you do that, one is to end on a motion. So someone closes a door, somebody puts down a pen, some motion that indicates finality. And the other is to end with an image. So something readers can look at or hear or smell, I suppose, some image that is sensory and that kind of shimmers after the story is over. But that assumes that the tension has mostly been resolved at the end, and that last little bit is just finding a way to land the plane safely.
Someone is interested in writing a memoir. Do you have more resources for this specifically?
I do. Actually, there's a really great writer. Her name is Sue William Silverman. Sue William Silverman. If you go to her website, she has a list. So first of all, she's written a great book on writing memoir. The title is escaping me right now. I'm sorry, but you'll see it there on her website. And but she has on that site a list of great books by like theme and category and stuff that are really helpful for memoir writers. There's also another book by a woman, one of my favorite writers, Abigail Thomas, and that book is called, it has memoir in the title. But it's actually a book of prompts where she says, write for 2 pages about this, write 2 pages about that. They're really wonderful. So the pair of them, Sue William Silverman and Abigail Thomas, both have, if you Google them, you'll find that information. They're really great.
Okay. We have a lot of good questions coming in. Someone wants to know how often is the lead character yourself? How often is it someone else? And what's the difference in writing in first versus third person?
Okay. All right, good. So if it's fiction, then I don't really ever want the lead character to be myself. That's very different. Some people do write autobiographical fiction, but because I write both fiction and nonfiction, I really separate out the two. So if I'm writing about myself, I'm going to put it out there in nonfiction, just straight out, it's me. And I'm the lead character, I'm the star of the show, right? Which is a little bit uncomfortable, and you have to find ways to make it not just all about me, but nonetheless, you are the lead character. If it's fiction, then I really want the character to be someone who is going to teach me some things. So I want it to be somebody who's really different. I'm working on a story right now. It's giving me fits, but I have a deadline Monday, so I'm going to get through it. That it's the main character is a 72-year-old woman, very religious woman who lives in Las Vegas. So nothing at all like me. And I love her. You know, she's not giving me fits. Some other things about the story are, but I really enjoy creating characters and getting to know them. Of course, there are elements of myself in her, because that's true for any artist working in any form. Is always going to be a tiny bit of a self-portrait as well. But I like to keep the fictional characters separate from me because of that phenomenon I said before. It's just so hard to not want to revise your life if you're writing fiction in which you're the main character. In terms of first and third person, they're really different, and a lot of times, you know, writers switch back and forth before we figure out how exactly we want to do this. The first person, you know, puts you inside of the character and allows you a super close relationship with them, but it's limited because then you can't really shift over to another character. In third person, you can do it either way. You can do a limited perspective where you stay really close into that character, but you also have the ability to say some things that character is not fully aware of. Or you can do an omniscient third person where you're actually able to go into everybody's perspective. And this novel Valentine that I'm reading right now does that. It has every chapter focuses on different characters in the third person, and it's really wonderful because even though it's third person in every chapter, it feels totally different because it's adopted kind of the way of thinking of the character that it focuses on.
And what's the author of that book, Valentine?
You know what? Can you excuse me 1 second? And it's right here. Let me just grab it. Of course, it's not where I left it. I can ask another question, and I will get that for you in 1 second.
Find it out later as well. Someone wanted to know what advice would you give someone who's interested in writing books for teens and preteens?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So there are a lot of great books. What advice would I give? That's a really good question. You know, I would actually advise you to Google writing YA, young adult literature. And there's going to be a lot of really good websites out there. Actually, we're now offering also some classes in this at DePaul. So, you know, as alums, if ever you want to come and take a course in either an undergraduate or potentially a graduate course, that's a possibility. So you could always contact me about that. But yeah, I don't, off the top of my head, I don't have a great reference, like a how-to book. I can only think of, Elizabeth Wetmore. I'm embarrassed that I didn't remember that off the top of my head, is the author of Valentine. Elizabeth Wetmore, just like it sounds. Okay, yeah, I don't have a good, off the top of my head, resource for how-to on YA literature, but I know there's a lot of really good stuff out there. The person who's teaching it for us right now is Erica Sanchez, who wrote the most wonderful book called I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. And she's really fantastic. So I would, follow her on Twitter or something and send her the question. I'm sure she'll have plenty to say about that.
We have a lot of good questions coming in. We're going to do just a few more, and then maybe we
Okay.
can follow up in our post-event survey. We can answer some more.
Okay.
So I wanted to know if you find it more helpful to create characters from your own experiences or to conjure them from thin air, from your imagination.
Uh-huh. That's also a really good question. I tend to want to, the truth is often when I'm creating a character, there's somebody in my life who it's loosely based on. Maybe not even somebody who's really close to me, but it starts out like, oh, okay, that's an interesting character trait, and let me build someone around that. And then eventually they start to look less and less like that original person. I do think it's tricky. There's that old adage to write what you know. That's what a lot of people were urged to do for a long time. Write what you know, write what you know. But Flannery O'Connor had I think a better piece of advice, which is write what you don't know you know. Right? Write what you don't know you know. So I'm not going to try to write a short story. Let me just pick something really random. I'm not going to try to write a short story about somebody who's living in poverty in Bali. I've never been to Bali. I don't have any idea what that experience would be like. I got nothing to go on. But I don't have to stick to, only writing about characters who are college professors, because I have, a lot of other knowledge and experience that I can draw from. I do think when you're writing about somebody who is, and let me pause and say, I think anybody should be able to write about, somebody who's living in poverty in Bali. But if it's somebody who's really just completely different from your experience in every way, then it's a good idea to do a lot of research into that kind of situation, that kind of character. Read what other people have written. Really, you have to school yourself if you're going to go far away from what is kind of your realm of experience and your ability to imagine. I think we have to be really humble about our abilities to imagine our ways into the lives of people who are wholly unlike us. But I think it's something that's worth doing.
I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I see it's 1:00. Maybe these questions, if you're okay with it, Michelle, I'll follow up with you and maybe we can send it out with the post-event survey.
Okay, sure.
Or I know I saw someone interested in the essay for the GRE, so hopefully we can help out and answer some of these questions.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I think that essay for the GRE might be a little bit out. I might want to refer you to people who are more practiced with that. But yeah, I'm happy to take more questions afterwards.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much, and thank you for joining. And we will follow up with answers to all of the different questions that you had.
Okay. Thanks everyone for coming by. Stay safe.